I'm going to dive into that for just a moment and speak to that because I think we'll share this particular clip with many of our clients. But here at PA Counseling, we're starting a DNA telehealth program. We're hoping to have it live next month. Might not happen next month. We'll see. I have a meeting later today. We'll find out for sure. But where we're going to have intakes via telehealth. So, one of the issues we run into is we often don't have enough intakes in a given clinic to support some of their programming. If we have intakes in that clinic, or if we have intakes that are available, the individual would actually participate with their intake completely online. They would need to present to, I think we're going to use Quest, but they would need to present to a lab prior to their intake so we have a good understanding of what they're presently using. And while we always ask our clients what they're presently using, we do have a trust and verify mentality. Because not everyone tells the full gospel truth when asked what their present substance use is. And then we can refer that individual to a 100% in-person group. So we will have an IOP entirely via telehealth. We will have several outpatient 1A levels of care entirely via telehealth. We already do have quite a few of them. So I know Eric Peroni runs 1A level of care. You have your Seeking Safety group. You're also adding the neurodivergent group, which hopefully we can speak a little bit more about that. And then these individuals would get their care completely online with the understanding that we can recommend hybrid when it's appropriate. So if this client's really struggling with telehealth, we may say, hey, you can't do telehealth anymore. If this client is showing up and all you see is like, just their eyeballs, or maybe the ceiling fan, or maybe they're on and off, or maybe they are violating confidentiality for having other people in the room during the group, or maybe, fill in the blank. There's lots of different reasons or ways in which somebody could not be successful in telehealth DNA. Those individuals may be referred to an in-person group within the clinic, or they may be referred to some sort of in-person component. So they might be asked to do some individual within the bricks and mortar clinic. They might be referred for CRS or case management within the bricks and mortar clinic. And then again, throughout all of it, they would be repeatedly required, essentially, to stay in DNA telehealth. They'd be required to do the urine screens online. We're still figuring out some of the insurance pieces, obviously, but I anticipate it'll be quite successful, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it for a few different reasons. One, the research shows it's about as effective as in person, which surprises me, but it's the truth of the matter. I think the other thing that's for many, I think there is a percentage of the population that really needs in person as well, according to the literature. Another data point that showed up in the literature that I thought was really important to pay attention to um, is that it's not just about the success of the program, but individuals are much more likely to actually stick with and complete DNA telehealth versus in-person components. So they have less issues when it's surrounding transportation. Many of these folks have lost their license, so they have to get transportation back and forth. They don't have to worry about child care or some of those other pieces. Sometimes they can jump right on before or after work, or even have like an extended break at work and go to a private and secure space and participate from that location. So when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to long-term sustainability, I think DNA telehealth is really promising for a whole host of different things. But Kristen, I know you've done a lot of DNA telehealth over the years, and you did it in the pandemic under duress, but I anticipate you've done it since then with more intentionality. I'm not sure about either of you and your experience in doing DNA telehealth, but I'm really curious to hear about. I don't want to talk about 2020. I'm still unpacking that. But DNA telehealth now with intentionality. What's been your experience with it? What's worked? What hasn't? When do you need to refer somebody to a higher level of care? What have we discovered about telehealth drug and alcohol work? Not under duress. I can't emphasize enough. I don't want to talk about 2020, but all the other stuff. Let's go there.
We've had a pretty fair mix of in-person and telehealth at Reading Psych since the pandemic. Eric's groups are in our clinic, so I do refer a lot of people to those groups. And just having those boundaries when it's not working to say, this is not working, we need to switch things up. Or having a combination of the telehealth group plus in-person individuals, that's been very successful.
That's what I'm hoping that we can
Yeah.
do a little bit more of, that we can have that telehealth group where you're broader frequency so that some of those barriers are reduced, but you still have that in-person touch point.
Yeah, I mean, I work with women a lot who are CYS involved or who lack a lot of significant resources. And so I will say that offering a telehealth option has been a game changer in regards to their willingness to commit to treatment and also just be able to show up. Um, like I had a client who had a hip replacement. She would have never been able to come into the clinic and sit through a 2 hour group in these chairs. You know what I mean? But because she was at home, she was able to still access this treatment when she needed it the most. I mean, that's a life altering surgery, and just being in recovery and having to navigate, pain medication afterwards and stuff like that. That's the time where you need your group the most. And if it was in person, I don't know how that would have turned out for her. And that's just one example of many. Whether it's childcare options, summer's here now. So a lot of, people have children that they don't have childcare for. They don't have transport.
Women specific
Yes.
that when you're looking at like, research based on like specific factors,
Yeah.
women are far more likely to not go to treatment because of childcare.
Yeah. It's a huge issue. And so when I tell them, hey, this is via Zoom, you just see this relief like rush over their face very often. And then also, this is a trauma group. So they struggle in groups, they struggle with setting boundaries in groups. And so they're able to build these relationships from the comfort of their home without worrying, like, am I gonna get too close to someone because I struggle with boundary setting, and then that person might jeopardize my recovery because I'm trusting them too much, or, so it helps develop relationships that are oftentimes felt as much safer. And I worried a lot about like the ability to connect in a group space over Zoom, because it has its challenges. But I will say these ladies really, I mean, and they're all over the state, so they come together and they connect and they share the different resources that they have. And I will say that's another great thing about telehealth is the access it allows to all of the different clinics. So if, in Harrisburg, up until very recently, we finally have a Spanish speaking therapist, thank goodness. But we've had to utilize York Psych. We've had to use, Reading because we didn't have those resources there. So having those options via hybrid or telehealth has gained access to resources that weren't necessarily in that county. So with Seeking Safety, it's a very unique group, and now women from across, all the different various locations have access to it instead of just York Psych, which is how it was before. So I think that's another big plus with that.
I also think about the smaller clinics that we have
Mm-hmm.
that,
Or
you know,
communities
they,
in general.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, like they work their tails off. They have like groups available, but they can't have groups at all hours of the day, right? So like Rebecca Hall has like a daytime group. So like the amount of freedom it's been for some folks to say, hey, we want you to do a group, and I hear of this really real barrier
Yeah.
that's going to happen in the evening when our groups are. What if we offer this time to you? Then that way it's not between those things. Then we can get into the real conversation. If you don't want to do group, but there's at least options, greater options that can come through the telehealth
Mm-hmm.
realm that clinics don't have to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
Work schedules, distance.
Yeah.
I mean, how many
Absolutely.
clients do we work with that, or counties we serve here in central Pennsylvania that, many of our clinics are in like the center or like the city seat or the county seat, like in Schuylkill County, we're in Pottsville. Schuylkill County is a big county though.
Yep.
And some folks could have to drive an hour and 20 minutes to just get to that clinic. So having that telehealth option really increases that accessibility, increases show rates, and ultimately, hopefully, access to recovery for these individuals so they can develop that more sustained recovery process. Any other telehealth experiences that you all have had? We're still figuring it out, but I think I'm really excited for the direction that we're going.
I think that coordination amongst the professionals involved is absolutely essential. It prevents triangulation. It prevents just thinking the other person's picking up the slack of the other person. And I think constant communication helps paint a picture of how that client is actually doing in that space. So there's sometimes that seeing someone in their home environment compared to them coming in person, you get to see maybe a little bit of a different side of things. So if they're struggling like with a hoarding situation, or they seem very scared in their home, like those are conversations that are important to have that you might not pick up on if they're only coming in person and you don't necessarily get to see some of that stuff that is accessible when you are doing a telehealth session. Or you're sitting there doing a session and there's gunshots going off in the background, which is very true for a lot of the clients that I work with. And so that helps you understand what it is that they're actually dealing with in their home and in their community. Recently, one of my clients was like doing group and is in the process of about to have to get evacuated because of the fires. And so it's like there's all these things that are going on within the communities that sometimes, for me at least, I've felt more, like I feel like I can see that more in a telehealth space than someone coming into the comfort of my office where they feel very safe there, but that's not what they get to leave to go home to. And I think that opens a whole other conversation in therapy. Like, I'm giving you all these coping skills, but like, does it even apply to what you're dealing with in your daily life with the stuff that you have to see every day in your community?
I've also found that it not only gives you insight into their daily life, but gives you more access to it. So when I'm a huge, I mentioned it already, I believe in the power of the collective. I believe when you're lost in the disease of addiction, you often have ruptures within your most important relationships. And I think resolving some of those ruptures can be the secret sauce or the difference maker between sustainable recovery and relapse. And so I'm often like chasing these individuals' partners or adult children or, adult sister, whatever it is, anybody else who's on your side and in your corner, but you may have hurt over the course of your active addiction. And we need to work through some of those pieces in order for them to be able to be an effective support for you and for their own needs. They may need to work through it. In different ways. And I found telehealth increases accessibility to those types of sessions so much more because then you're not navigating two work schedules plus the therapist schedule. Or maybe they'll say, like, hey, you're the one that's been using. Why should I go to therapy? And it's like, I get that. I understand. Could you just come to a Zoom? And they're like, okay, I'll do that. So it's also like a lower barrier to entry when it comes to pulling in their ecosystem or some of their natural supports. I want to thank you all for spending so much time here with me today, for unpacking some of these different things. Is there anything left unsaid? Are there any pieces that we haven't talked about here today that you think would be useful in the area of DNA telehealth, drug and alcohol work in general, that of the provider? Anything left unsaid before we finish?
I would highlight, especially for the newer therapists, boundaries.
Oh,
Ooh, yeah.
They're so important. I've had a lot of long-term clients that have entered the field as CRS, and that's always something that we talk about within therapy is what are your boundaries? Talking about transference, counter transference, um, but just the boundaries that I've seen people break and how it just cascades.
yes.
So even in telehealth, having those boundaries and having those difficult conversations of if you don't change this behavior, telehealth is not going to work.
Yeah.
I think for clinicians starting out here at PCS, there's, a mentor that they can go to for support to ask questions. There's the person of the therapist groups, right, where they get to work on the intersection of their stuff and the work that they're doing. There's a weekly meeting that we do just to teach the nuts and bolts of different things, right? There's people that have been working here for a long, long time. And there's, in a lot of our clinics, there's folks with a history of like being in recovery, right? So like using those people, leaning into those things, and if you need to go back to a POTS meeting, come back to a POTS meeting. If you need to use your treatment team meeting time to have conversations, use that time because that's what it's there for. That's the purpose of it.
Yeah, I was going to touch again on another benefit of telehealth, like especially where the two clinics are that I work at. For some people that don't live within the city, it's very triggering to come into the city for sessions. And so I will
They
say,
used to come into the city for other
exactly.
reasons.
Yeah, they have complete physical reactions coming into any large city, let alone the one that has trauma triggers around every corner. So I will say that is something beneficial, having more access to more appointments without having to, necessarily be in the same space that you used to use substances in. So I think that's just been like another benefit. And yeah, there's always someone to go to if you are a new clinician. Like, you don't have to be fearful of what you don't know because there's so many people around you that know the things. So, not being afraid to ask. And yeah, I echo the boundaries. That is so essential for multiple reasons when doing drug and alcohol work and checking in on the codependency stuff. Because, like I said before, love does not cure addiction. So, being afraid to, you know, like ruffle some feathers is not great, and it will get you in some really sketchy spots. So using those groups and supervision and mentors is really important for your development.
You make very good points there. And as you were talking, I think my closing thought that I'm most excited about with DNA telehealth is the possibility to have more specialized groups. I come from a season where we used to try to do the specialized groups within the clinic, and we would sometimes have tremendous success. I remember years ago, and you were around when Jobana was here, and she was pre-licensed. She had a mental health. She had a group that was mental health for Spanish speaking women that had concurrent um, physical health concerns.
Mm.
And I remember when she came to me and she said, I want to start this group. And I was like, girl, you're pre-licensed, so you can't take any private insurances. You want it to be women, Spanish speaking, mental health, physical health. There's no way you're gonna have enough clients to succeed. Man, she proved me so wrong. She ran that group like full to bursting until the end of her season with PCS, and it was amazing. But it doesn't happen like that so often in a clinic setting. So often in clinic setting, you have 2 or 3 clients that would really benefit from this. But 2 hours with only 2 or 3 clients, whew, that's a lot of time for 2 or 3 people in a group setting. But telehealth, like you're starting one for the neurodivergent community. Would you speak a little bit just to what that is? Because that is so new, and to give an example of kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so something I've noticed recently as I'm stabilizing trauma symptoms in many of my clients is that they are identifying these other mental health factors that have been a part of their story since they were very young. And they're realizing they're somewhere on this neurodivergent spectrum. And some of them have actual diagnoses. They've been able to do that work with neuropsych evals or autism evals throughout their time in services. And some of them don't have diagnosis. They've just realized I'm a little neurospicy and I need some support with that. And I think I know there's not a lot of resources out there because I've looked where
I looked for you.
yes,
as well,
yeah,
and I
you
couldn't
looked as
find it.
well. And when you've got addiction and then you've got these other comorbidities of whether it's physical health or PTSD or bipolar, and then you sprinkle some neurodivergence in there too, it's like a recipe for disaster if you let it be. And so I think it's something that has maybe been touched a little bit in drug and alcohol treatment as time has gone on. He's like, no, not at all. But my goal is to give a space to those individuals who it's not a differential diagnosis. So you're not neurodivergent because you're on all of the methadone ever and you think that you have ADHD. That's not what we're looking for here. But like actual stable recovery and then realizing how neurodivergence could impact your recovery journey at some point or exacerbate other symptoms that you have like PTSD, bipolar, medication compliance, things like that. So had to make a curriculum because there wasn't one. And so I pulled in a lot of stuff like unmasking and the dangers of that versus like the pros, cons of that and how to do it safely. Boundaries, relationships, creating environments that are safe for you as a person instead of just trying to fit into all of these different environments that are more neurotypical. Time management, time blindness, financial stuff, brain detox, food, caffeine, how drinking 75 monsters a day is not going to help your situation. You got to eat fruits and vegetables sometimes. Nicotine and Monster is not going to help your mental health. I know, it sucks, but so just capturing a lot of that stuff. I actually interviewed each of my clients and said, what would help you? And they all gave me different ideas. And so that's what helped me kind of build this curriculum up. So I'm very excited about it because it's really built by the clients and what they've told me over the years that they need. And so I'm really excited to provide this, service to them and hope that it helps them in this next season of their recovery.
I'm really excited for you.
I think the addiction field has really ignored specifically ADHD, adult
Yes.
ADHD.
Yes.
Because it's like, okay, you're an adult with ADHD, but we're not going to treat you with stimulants because you have an addiction history. So
Yeah.
we're just going to ignore that part,
Yeah.
not even deal with it.
Look away.
Yes.
Yeah. Just pretend that's not even a, yeah.
Right, but now you're sober 2 or 3 years and you're struggling with the inattention, the
Yeah.
impulsivity, all this stuff, and it's affecting your family, your work life, and we need to deal with it.
Well, Kristen has a group coming. And Kristen, I'm so excited for that group and all the possibilities that DNA telehealth have to offer.